They said women couldn't lead men in combat, that female officers were fine for logistics and support roles. But when bullets started flying and lives hung in the balance, soldiers needed a real leader. Someone with a natural authority that only came with testosterone and a deep voice. They said this with absolute certainty, backed by centuries of military tradition and the unshakable conviction that some truths were simply written into the fabric of human nature. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Reaper Hawkins stood at attention in the pre-dawn darkness of Fort Braxton's parade ground, her uniform pressed to regulation perfection, her posture radiating the kind of quiet competence that had carried her through 15 years of military service. To the casual observer, she appeared to be exactly what the Army's public relations department loved to showcase. A successful female officer who'd proven that women could excel in the modern military as long as they stayed within appropriate boundaries. The early morning inspection routine unfolded with mechanical precision. Hawkins moved down the line of soldiers from Charlie Company's 3rd Platoon, checking uniforms, equipment, and the 1,000 small details that separated professional military units from armed mobs. Her voice carried the calm authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, offering corrections and praise in measured tones that suggested competence without threatening the established order. "Outstanding work on the equipment maintenance, Sergeant Torres," she noted, examining the spotless condition of an M4 carbine. "Your attention to detail reflects well on the entire unit." The soldiers responded with the professional courtesy they'd been trained to show all officers, regardless of gender. But their body language told a different story. The subtle hesitation before responding to her orders. The way their eyes drifted toward the male NCOs for confirmation. The careful politeness that suggested respect for her rank rather than genuine confidence in her leadership abilities. Staff Sergeant Mike Chun, the platoon's senior enlisted advisor, maintained perfect military bearing as he accompanied Hawkins through the inspection. His 15 years of combat experience in Afghanistan and Iraq had earned him the unquestioned respect of every soldier in the unit, and his quiet competence served as an unofficial backup to whatever decisions the lieutenant colonel might make. The arrangement worked smoothly, with Chun's practical expertise complementing Hawkins' administrative efficiency in a partnership that satisfied the chain of command's need for female representation while ensuring that real military decisions remained in experienced male hands. The inspection revealed the kind of attention to detail that marked professional military units. Equipment was properly maintained, uniforms met regulation standards, and the soldiers demonstrated the bearing and discipline expected of America's elite fighting forces. But beneath the surface professionalism lay an undercurrent of skepticism that no amount of regulation compliance could entirely mask. Private First Class Danny Rodriguez whispered to his battle buddy as they secured their gear after inspection, his voice barely audible but carrying the casual dismissiveness that marked so many conversations about female leadership. "She's good at the paperwork stuff, but I'd rather have Chun in charge if we're heading into real action. You know what I mean?" The sentiment wasn't unique to Rodriguez. Throughout Charlie Company, soldiers expressed similar opinions in careful language that avoided outright insubordination while making their preferences clear. They respected Hawkins' technical competence, appreciated her fairness in handling administrative matters, and acknowledged that she'd earned her rank through legitimate achievement. But when discussions turned to combat leadership, to the kind of split-second decision-making that determined who lived and who died in hostile territory, the consensus remained unchanged. Women could support the mission, but men led it. This attitude extended far beyond the enlisted ranks. In the officers' club at Fort Braxton, conversations among field-grade officers frequently centered on the challenges of integrating women into combat roles. Colonel James Patterson, the brigade commander, often expressed his support for female officers in carefully diplomatic terms that emphasized their contributions to logistics, intelligence, and support functions while subtly reinforcing traditional boundaries. Lieutenant Colonel Hawkins has done outstanding work with personnel management and training coordination. He would say during evaluation meetings, "Her organizational skills are exactly what we need for complex administrative challenges. We're fortunate to have officers like her handling the detailed planning that allows our combat leaders to focus on their primary mission." The praise was genuine but revealing. Hawkins was valued for her ability to manage the complex bureaucratic machinery that kept modern military units functioning, not for her potential to lead soldiers into harm's way. Her success was measured in properly completed paperwork, efficient resource allocation, and smooth coordination between different administrative departments. Important work, certainly, but distinctly separate from the core mission of preparing warriors for combat. Major Susan Walsh, one of the few other female field-grade officers at Fort Braxton, had internalized these limitations so completely that she actively reinforced them. During planning sessions for upcoming training exercises, she consistently deferred to her male counterparts on tactical matters while asserting her expertise in support functions. "I think we should let Major Thompson handle the combat scenario development," she would suggest during staff meetings. "My background in logistics gives me a better perspective on the supply chain requirements for extended field operations." This self-imposed segregation of responsibilities reflected a broader, institutional understanding about where female officers belonged in the military hierarchy. They could excel in specialized fields that required attention to detail, organizational skills, and the ability to manage complex administrative processes. But the fundamental business of military leadership, making life and death decisions under extreme pressure, inspiring soldiers to follow orders that might result in their deaths, projecting the kind of commanding presence that could hold units together when everything was falling apart, that remained the exclusive domain of men. The training exercises conducted at Fort Braxton reinforced these assumptions through carefully structured scenarios that placed female officers in supporting roles, while male leaders handled the primary tactical challenges. Hawkins typically found herself assigned to positions that required coordination between different units, management of supply chains, or oversight of medical and administrative support functions. Important responsibilities that demanded real skill and expertise, but distinctly separate from the direct command of soldiers in simulated combat situations. During a recent exercise simulating urban warfare scenarios, Hawkins had been assigned to coordinate medical evacuation procedures while Major Thompson led Alpha Company through a series of building clearing operations. Her performance had been flawless, organizing casualty collection points, managing helicopter landing zones, and ensuring that wounded soldiers received rapid medical attention. The after-action report praised her efficiency and attention to detail, noting that her coordination had significantly reduced simulated casualty rates. But when soldiers discussed the exercise afterward, their focus remained on Thompson's tactical leadership during the actual assault phases. His ability to adapt to changing conditions, make quick decisions under pressure, and maintain unit cohesion during high-stress situations earned the kind of respect that Hawkins' logistical expertise never quite achieved. The message was clear. Both skill sets were valuable, but only one represented real military leadership. The institutional bias wasn't limited to training exercises. Assignment patterns throughout the Army reflected similar assumptions about gender-appropriate roles. Female officers were routinely assigned to staff positions, intelligence analysis, logistics coordination, and support functions that utilized their talents while keeping them away from direct combat leadership. The justification was always framed in terms of maximizing individual strengths and ensuring optimal unit performance, But the underlying pattern was unmistakable. Hawkins had accepted this reality with the pragmatic resignation of someone who understood the system's limitations and worked within them to achieve whatever success was possible. Her efficiency evaluations consistently rated her as outstanding in her assigned areas of responsibility. Her superiors valued her contributions and treated her with professional respect. Her career progression followed a predictable path that would likely lead to senior staff positions where her administrative skills could be utilized. Without challenging fundamental assumptions about combat leadership, the soldiers under her command had learned to appreciate her competence while maintaining their deeper loyalty to the male NCOs who they viewed as their real leaders in any situation that mattered. This dual command structure worked smoothly as long as responsibilities remained clearly delineated and everyone understood their proper roles. Hawkins handled the administrative complexity that kept the unit functioning efficiently, while Chun and the other senior enlisted men provided the tactical expertise and personal leadership that soldiers trusted when their lives were on the waves. Hawkins herself had internalized many of these limitations, focusing her professional development on areas where female officers were expected to excel while avoiding direct challenges to male authority in traditional combat roles. Her promotion record reflected this strategic approach, showing consistent success in positions that utilized her strengths without threatening established hierarchies. She had learned to be valuable without being threatening, competent without being competitive in areas where competition might challenge fundamental assumptions about military leadership. The arrangement satisfied everyone's expectations and maintained institutional stability while providing the Army with genuine talent and expertise. Female officers like Hawkins brought real value to military operations through their specialized skills and professional competence. Male officers retained their traditional roles as combat leaders and tactical decision-makers. The system worked efficiently as long as everyone understood their appropriate place within the established hierarchy. But beneath the surface stability of this carefully balanced arrangement lay assumptions that had never been truly tested under the extreme conditions where military leadership mattered most. The comfortable certainty that women could support combat operations but couldn't lead them remained theoretical, based on tradition and institutional bias rather than empirical evidence. The question of whether female officers possessed the fundamental qualities necessary for combat leadership had been answered through exclusion rather than evaluation, assumption rather than opportunity. As Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Hawkins completed her morning inspection and prepared for another day of administrative excellence, neither she nor anyone else at Fort Braxton imagined that circumstances would soon provide a definitive answer to questions that the military establishment preferred to leave unasked. The comfortable assumptions about gender, leadership, and combat effectiveness were about to encounter realities that would challenge everything they thought they knew about who could lead American soldiers in the ultimate test of military service. What they didn't know about Rebecca Hawkins could have filled a classified filing cabinet 3 stories deep. Behind the perfectly pressed uniform and measured administrative competence lay a combat record that most male officers could only dream of achieving, carefully buried beneath layers of military bureaucracy and strategic career management that had kept her true capabilities invisible to those who preferred their assumptions unchallenged. The transformation had begun 12 years earlier in the mountains of Afghanistan, where 2nd Lieutenant Hawkins had been assigned to a forward operating base as part of a cultural support team, the military's diplomatic way of placing female officers near combat operations without officially acknowledging their role in direct action missions. Her job description involved liaison work with local women, intelligence gathering in situations where male soldiers couldn't operate effectively, and providing female presence during sensitive operations involving civilian populations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The reality had been dramatically different. Within weeks of her arrival at FOB Sentinel, Hawkins found herself integrated into special operations, missions that required someone who could think tactically under extreme pressure while maintaining the flexibility to adapt to rapidly changing battlefield conditions. Her official paperwork described her as a liaison specialist, but the operators she worked with knew her by a different designation entirely. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, a medic who had served 3 tours with Special Operations units, still remembered the first time she witnessed Hawkins in actual combat. The mission had started as a routine intelligence-gathering operation in a village suspected of harboring Taliban leadership. The plan called for a carefully coordinated approach that would allow them to identify targets without triggering a firefight that might harm civilian populations. Lieutenant Hawkins was supposed to be handling the cultural interface stuff. Santos had later told her husband during a satellite phone call, "You know, talking to the women, making sure we didn't violate any local customs, keeping things diplomatic." But when the whole operation went sideways and we found ourselves pinned down by accurate sniper fire from 3 different directions, she transformed into someone completely different. The ambush had been expertly coordinated with enemy fighters, using the village's complex layout to create overlapping fields of fire that trapped the American patrol in a kill zone with limited escape routes. The team leader, Captain Mark Rodriguez, had taken shrapnel to his shoulder within the first minute of the engagement, leaving his men without clear tactical guidance while enemy fire intensified from positions they couldn't identify. Hawkins had assessed the situation with the cold calculation of someone analyzing a chess problem rather than fighting for her life. She identified the enemy's positioning strategy, recognized the tactical pattern they were implementing, and formulated a counter-strategy that would neutralize their advantages while exploiting weaknesses in their defensive setup. "Break contact." To the northeast, she had ordered over the radio, her voice cutting through the chaos with absolute authority. "Rodriguez, take Santos and Martinez and establish overwatch on the high ground. Peterson, Wilson, and Jackson, follow me. We're going to flank left and roll up their firing line from the weak side." The plan was tactically sound but required split-second timing and precise execution under intense enemy fire. More importantly, it required soldiers to follow orders from someone they'd been trained to see as support personnel rather than combat leadership. But something in Hawkins' voice, in the confidence of her tactical analysis and the clarity of her commands, had cut through institutional bias and connected directly with their survival instincts. Sergeant First Class David Peterson, a veteran of multiple combat deployments, later described following Hawkins through that engagement as the most natural thing in the world. Her movement techniques were flawless, her tactical awareness was superior to most officers he'd served under, and her ability to coordinate complex maneuvers while under fire exceeded anything he'd experienced in conventional units. She moved like someone who'd been doing this her entire life, Peterson had told his team leader during the after-action debrief. Every decision she made was exactly right. The way she read the enemy's positioning, the timing of our flanking movement, the coordination with Rodriguez's Overwatch team, it was textbook small unit tactics executed at the highest level. The engagement had ended with the enemy fighters neutralized and no American casualties beyond Rodriguez's minor shrapnel wound. But what impressed the operators most wasn't just Hawkins' tactical competence. It was her ability to maintain situational awareness and make sound decisions, while simultaneously engaging targets with her personal weapon. Her marksmanship was exceptional, placing accurate fire on enemy positions while coordinating movement for her team members. The official after-action report had credited Captain Rodriguez with the successful counter-ambush operation, noting his effective leadership. Despite being wounded early in the engagement, Hawkins' role was described as providing valuable cultural liaison support and demonstrating commendable courage under fire. The narrative preserved the fiction that male officers led combat operations, while female personnel provided specialized support functions. But word spread through the special operations community in the way that information always traveled among people whose lives depended on knowing who they could trust in extreme situations. Hawkins began receiving requests for cultural support, assignments that had nothing to do with interfacing with local populations and everything to do with having someone who could think tactically when conventional approaches weren't working. Master Sergeant John Thompson, who ran selection for one of the Army's most elite units, had personally requested Hawkins for an operation that required infiltrating a Taliban command structure that had proven impervious to traditional intelligence gathering methods. The mission involved inserting a small team into a heavily defended compound, eliminating specific high-value targets, and extracting without triggering a larger firefight that might compromise ongoing operations in the region. We needed someone who could adapt to changing conditions while maintaining tactical discipline, Thompson had explained to his commander when justifying the unusual personnel request. Lieutenant Hawkins has demonstrated exactly that capability under combat conditions. Her gender actually works to our advantage for this particular mission profile. The operation had required Hawkins to infiltrate the target compound, disguised as a local woman, while carrying concealed weapons and communication equipment. Once inside, she would signal the assault team while simultaneously neutralizing interior guards to prevent them from warning the primary targets. The plan demanded someone who could maintain cover while preparing for instant transition to direct combat action. The intelligence gathering phase had revealed that the Taliban leadership was using the compound for planning operations against American forces in the region. The targets were experienced fighters who had survived multiple coalition attempts to eliminate them, and they maintained security protocols that made conventional approaches extremely dangerous for attacking forces. Hawkins had spent 2 weeks studying the target, learning the patterns of guard rotations, identifying entry and exit points, and developing contingency plans for every possible complication that might arise during the mission. Her preparation was exhaustive, covering everything from the specific dialects spoken by local women to the precise timing required for coordinating with the external assault team. The execution had been flawless. Hawkins had gained entry to the compound, identified all interior personnel, neutralized the guards at exactly the right moment, and provided the assault team with real-time intelligence about enemy positions and movement patterns. Her tactical communication during the operation had been so precise that the entire engagement lasted less than 4 minutes from initial entry to final extraction. Sergeant First Class Carlos Mendez, who had served as the team's breacher during the operation, still considered it the most professionally executed mission of his career. Lieutenant Hawkins controlled every aspect of that operation, he had told his wife during post-deployment leave. She wasn't just providing intelligence or support, she was running the entire tactical sequence from inside the target area, while engaging enemy combatants with her sidearm. The after-action review had been classified at levels that ensured the details would never appear in official records or personnel evaluations. Hawkins' role was sanitized in reports that emphasized the success of unconventional tactics and specialized intelligence assets, without explicitly describing her tactical leadership during the most critical phases of the operation. But among the operators who had witnessed her performance, Rebecca Hawkins' reputation was transformed from competent support officer to someone whose tactical judgment they trusted absolutely. Requests for her participation in sensitive operations multiplied as word spread through informal networks that connected special operations units across different service branches. Colonel Patricia Martinez, who commanded the Joint Task Force responsible for high-value target operations in Afghanistan's eastern provinces, had begun structuring missions specifically around Hawkins' unique capabilities. Her ability to operate in environments where conventional male leadership would be ineffective, combined with her demonstrated tactical competence under extreme pressure, made her invaluable for operations that required both cultural sensitivity and lethal effectiveness. Lieutenant Hawkins represents exactly the kind of adaptability that modern warfare demands. Martinez had written in a classified evaluation that would never become part of Hawkins' official personnel file. Her tactical judgment, situational awareness, and ability to coordinate complex operations under combat conditions exceeds that of most field-grade officers in conventional units. The missions had grown progressively more complex and dangerous as Hawkins proved capable of handling responsibilities that went far beyond anything contemplated in official policies about female integration into combat roles. She had led infiltration teams, coordinated close air support during urban operations, and made tactical decisions that affected the lives of dozens of special operations personnel. During one particularly challenging operation in Helmand Province, Hawkins had found herself temporarily commanding a joint force of American and British special operations personnel when the designated mission commander was incapacitated by an improvised explosive device. The situation required someone to coordinate extraction of wounded personnel while simultaneously directing counter-battery fire against enemy positions that had the landing zone under direct observation. Captain James Morrison, a British SAS officer who had participated in that operation, later described Hawkins' performance as absolutely extraordinary. Her ability to coordinate multiple moving pieces while maintaining tactical awareness of the broader situation had impressed hardened veterans who had served in some of the most demanding combat environments in the world. She understood the tactical picture better than anyone else on the ground, Morrison had reported to his superiors. Her coordination of the medical evacuation while directing suppressive fire was textbook battle management. The way she controlled the chaos and got everyone home safely was the finest example of small unit leadership I've witnessed in 15 years of special operations. The classified commendations that accumulated in Hawkins' special access files painted a picture of tactical competence and combat leadership that contradicted every assumption about female capabilities in direct action roles. But those files remained locked away in secure facilities, accessible only to personnel with specific clearances and operational need. The official narrative of Rebecca Hawkins' military career continued to emphasize her success in conventional administrative and liaison roles, carefully avoiding any mention of tactical achievements that might challenge institutional assumptions about gender-appropriate assignments. Her promotion record reflected steady advancement through positions that utilized her organizational skills while keeping her away from combat command responsibilities that might threaten traditional hierarchies. The first signs of trouble appeared during what should have been a routine training exercise at the Mojave Desert Combat Training Center. Exercise Iron Thunder was designed to test Charlie Company's readiness for potential deployment to volatile regions where American forces might face asymmetric warfare against technologically sophisticated adversaries. The scenario involved a 3-day operation in terrain that mimicked the geographic and tactical challenges they might encounter in Eastern, European or Middle Eastern theaters. Lieutenant Colonel Hawkins noticed the discrepancies during the initial intelligence briefing on day 1 of the exercise. The opposing force commanders, played by rotating instructor cadre from the training center, were implementing tactical patterns that didn't match the scripted exercise parameters distributed to company leadership. Their movement signatures suggested coordination and technological capabilities that exceeded what should have been available to the simulated enemy forces. The op for positioning is following a deployment pattern consistent with peer-level military doctrine, Hawkins mentioned quietly to Major Thompson during a break in the briefing. The radio intercept data indicates they're using frequency-hopping communications and encrypted tactical networks that wouldn't be available to the insurgent forces were supposed to be facing. Thompson glanced at the tactical display showing enemy positions and dismissed her observation with the casual confidence of someone who'd never encountered a training scenario that deviated from its planned parameters. The instructors probably upgraded the exercise to make it more challenging. These training rotations are designed to push our capabilities and test our adaptability under stress. But Hawkins' experience with special operations had taught her to recognize when tactical situations didn't match their official descriptions. The opposing force wasn't behaving like insurgents or irregular fighters. Their communications discipline, movement patterns, and coordination suggested professional military units with access to advanced equipment and sophisticated tactical doctrine. During the company's movement to their initial objective, Hawkins monitored the radio frequencies that should have carried routine exercise coordination traffic between the training cadre and range control. Instead of the standard administrative communications that manage safety protocols and exercise boundaries, she detected fragments of operational traffic that suggested real-world intelligence gathering and tactical coordination. Range control is using authentication codes that match classified military networks, she reported to Staff Sergeant Chun during their halt at the first checkpoint. Those aren't training frequencies. They're connected to actual military communication systems that handle sensitive operational traffic. Chun studied the tactical display on his handheld device, noting the positions of friendly and opposing forces within the exercise area. Everything appeared normal according to the parameters they'd been briefed, with clearly marked boundaries and properly coordinated safety protocols. Man, the exercise control team has to coordinate with real military networks to ensure we don't interfere with actual operations. That's standard procedure for large-scale training events. But Hawkins' instincts, honed through years of operating in environments where survival depended on recognizing threats before they became lethal, were screaming warnings that everyone else was missing. The tactical signature of this exercise was wrong. The opposing force was too professional, too well coordinated, and too sophisticated for a training scenario designed to test conventional infantry tactics. She attempted to share her concerns with the company leadership during their evening planning session for Day 2 operations. The briefing tent was filled with officers reviewing maps, coordinating fire support, and discussing tactical approaches for the next day's objectives. The atmosphere was relaxed and professional, with the confident efficiency that marked well-trained military units preparing for routine training exercises. Sir, I'm seeing some anomalies in the opposition force behavior that might indicate this exercise is more complex than our original briefing suggested, Hawkins said to Major Thompson, who was reviewing the next day's movement timeline with his platoon leaders. Their tactical competence exceeds what we'd normally expect from role-playing instructors. Thompson looked up from his map with the patient expression of a commander dealing with overcautious subordinates. Lieutenant Colonel, the training cadre at this facility includes some of the Army's most experienced NCOs and officers. They're supposed to provide realistic opposition that challenges our tactical decision-making. If they weren't competent, the exercise wouldn't serve its training purpose. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, who commanded 2nd Platoon, nodded in agreement while marking her unit's planned routes on the tactical overlay. The OPUFER has been conducting these exercises for years. They know exactly how to create realistic scenarios that test our capabilities without compromising safety protocols. The dismissal was polite but absolute. Hawkins' concerns were being interpreted as excessive caution from an officer whose primary experience involved administrative coordination rather than tactical operations. Her insights about enemy behavior patterns and communication signatures were viewed as interesting observations rather than warnings about potential complications that might affect the exercise outcome. That night, while the rest of the company prepared equipment and reviewed plans for the next day's operations, Hawkins conducted her own reconnaissance of the areas surrounding their defensive positions. Her movement through the desert terrain was silent and professional, utilizing skills learned during night infiltration missions in Afghanistan, where detection meant death. What she discovered confirmed her worst suspicions. The opposing force wasn't using standard training equipment or following conventional exercise protocols. Their night vision capabilities were military-grade rather than the commercial equipment typically used for training purposes. Their communications security exceeded anything necessary for simulated combat scenarios. Most disturbing, their surveillance of Charlie Company's positions was far more sophisticated than required for an exercise designed to test basic infantry tactics. They're conducting detailed intelligence collection on our personnel, equipment, and tactical procedures, Hawkins whispered into her radio during her return to the company perimeter. This isn't a training exercise. It's an evaluation of our operational capabilities by people who have access to classified information about our unit's mission and deployment status. The duty officer who received her transmission was Sergeant First Class Michael Torres, a veteran of 2 combat deployments, who'd been selected for his reliability and judgment. But even Torres, who respected Hawkins' competence in administrative matters, found her tactical assessment difficult to accept. "Ma'am, the exercise control team has complete access to our training records and tactical doctrine. That's how they design scenarios that effectively test our capabilities. They're supposed to know our procedures so they can create realistic challenges." But Hawkins knew the difference between training oversight and operational intelligence gathering. The opposing force was collecting information that went far beyond what would be needed for exercise evaluation. They were documenting individual performance characteristics, leadership decision-making patterns, and unit capabilities in ways that suggested preparation for real-world encounters rather than training. Assessment. During day 2 of the exercise, Hawkins' observations became increasingly difficult to dismiss. The opposing force demonstrated tactical knowledge of Charlie Company's specific procedures that shouldn't have been available to training instructors. They anticipated the company's movements with uncanny accuracy, positioned their forces to exploit weaknesses in the unit's standard operating procedures, and coordinated their responses with a level of sophistication that suggested extensive preparation and detailed intelligence about the American unit's capabilities. "They know our radio procedures, our leadership decision-making patterns, and our tactical preferences," Hawkins reported to Major Thompson during the midday tactical pause. "They're not reacting to our movements, they're anticipating them, based on detailed knowledge of how this specific unit operates under combat conditions." Thompson studied the tactical situation map, noting the positions where Charlie Company had encountered opposition and the patterns of enemy contact throughout the morning's operations. The exercise was proving more challenging than expected, but the difficulty seemed consistent with high-quality training designed to push the unit beyond its comfort zone. "These instructors work with multiple units throughout the year," Thompson replied while coordinating with his platoon leaders. "They develop expertise in predicting how different companies will respond to specific tactical challenges. That's exactly the kind of realistic opposition that makes these exercises valuable for our professional development." But Hawkins' special operations background had taught her to recognize when tactical situations extended beyond their apparent parameters. The intelligence collection, the sophisticated coordination, and the detailed knowledge of unit-specific procedures all pointed toward an evaluation that served purposes beyond training assessment. She attempted to document her observations in formal communications to higher headquarters, but the exercise communication protocols limited contact with outside agencies to emergency situations that posed immediate threats to personnel safety. Her concerns about the nature of the opposing force didn't meet the criteria for breaking communication discipline during ongoing training operations. Private First Class Jamie Sullivan, who served as Hawkins' radio operator during the exercise, noticed her growing frustration with the command structure's response to her warnings. Sullivan had served with Hawkins long enough to recognize when the lieutenant colonel was seeing tactical patterns that others were missing. "Ma'am, you want me to try reaching the brigade on one of the alternate frequencies?" Sullivan asked during a quiet moment while they established a new radio relay position. "Maybe the higher-ups need to know about what you're seeing out here." But Hawkins understood that bypassing the chain of command during a training exercise would be career suicide, especially when her concerns couldn't be proven through conventional intelligence channels. Her observations were based on tactical instincts and pattern recognition that couldn't be quantified in the kind of objective reports that military bureaucracy required for serious action. By the third day of Exercise Iron Thunder, the pattern had become undeniable to anyone with the experience to recognize it. The opposing force was conducting a sophisticated intelligence collection operation against Charlie Company, gathering detailed information about American military capabilities, procedures, and personnel under the cover of routine training activities. Exercise concluded with a standard after-action review that praised Charlie Company's performance while noting areas for improvement in tactical coordination and adaptive planning. The official evaluation focused on conventional training objectives without acknowledging the sophisticated intelligence operation that had been conducted against the American unit. Major Thompson's final assessment credited the training value of facing a well-prepared opposing force while noting that some aspects of the exercise had been more challenging than anticipated. The OPFOR demonstrated exceptional tactical competence that really tested our ability to adapt and overcome unexpected challenges. This kind of realistic training is exactly what we need to prepare for potential real-world deployments. But Hawkins knew they had been evaluated, assessed, and cataloged by adversaries who were now in possession of detailed intelligence about Charlie Company's capabilities, leadership patterns, and tactical vulnerabilities. The comfortable assumption that training exercises were controlled environments had been shattered by the reality that America's enemies were adaptable, sophisticated, and entirely capable of using official training programs to gather the intelligence they needed for future operations against American forces. The warning signs were clear to anyone with the experience to recognize them. But the institutional bias that dismissed female tactical insights as overcautiousness had prevented the command structure from understanding that Charlie Company had just been thoroughly compromised by adversaries who were far more dangerous than anyone wanted to acknowledge. The emergency deployment order arrived at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning that would forever divide Charlie Company's history into before and after. The secure communication that shattered the pre-dawn quiet at Fort Braxton carried classification markings that indicated immediate operational necessity and strategic importance that extended far beyond routine military deployments. Staff duty Officer Captain Jennifer Walsh received the encrypted transmission in the brigade command center, her hands trembling slightly as she decoded the message that would transform a training unit into an active combat force within 18 hours. The deployment parameters were unlike anything in her 8 years of military service. Immediate airlift to a classified location, minimal equipment load, and operational security protocols that prohibited any communication with family members or outside agencies. "Ma'am, we need Lieutenant Colonel Hawkins and Major Thompson in the talk immediately," Walsh reported to Colonel Patterson, who had been summoned from his quarters by the urgent nature of the deployment order. The mission parameters indicate this is a no-notice deployment to an active theater with time-sensitive operational requirements. The briefing room filled rapidly with Charlie Company's leadership, their faces reflecting the controlled tension that marked professional soldiers confronting unknown challenges. The tactical displays showed a region of Eastern Europe where ethnic tensions had recently escalated into armed conflict between government forces and separatist groups backed by foreign military advisors. "Gentlemen and Lieutenant Colonel Hawkins," Colonel Patterson began, his voice carrying the weight of someone delivering orders that would put soldiers in harm's way. "Charlie Company has been selected for immediate deployment to support NATO peacekeeping operations in a region where American diplomatic personnel and civilian contractors are currently trapped by rapidly deteriorating security conditions." The mission briefing revealed a complex situation that had evolved from political unrest to active warfare in less than 72 hours. A coup attempt had fractured the government's control over key military installations, while foreign-sponsored militias had seized strategic infrastructure, including airports, communication centers, and border crossings. American citizens working for various government agencies and private contractors found themselves isolated in a hostile environment with no secure evacuation routes. Major Thompson studied the intelligence displays, showing enemy force dispositions and capability assessments with the focused attention of someone analyzing a chess problem that involved human lives rather than wooden pieces. The opposing forces included regular military units equipped with modern weapon systems, experienced irregular fighters with extensive local knowledge, and foreign military advisors whose presence suggested state-level sponsorship of the conflict. "Sir, the intelligence picture shows we're facing a peer-level threat with advanced anti-aircraft capabilities, sophisticated communications networks, and detailed knowledge of NATO tactical doctrine," Thompson observed while reviewing the enemy order of battle. "This isn't a peacekeeping operation against lightly armed insurgents. We're looking at potential combat against professional military forces." Colonel Patterson nodded grimly as he highlighted the strategic objectives that Charlie Company would be expected to achieve. The mission involved establishing a secure corridor to an isolated safe house where American personnel were sheltering, coordinating their evacuation to a temporary landing zone, and maintaining defensive positions until airlift assets could extract everyone to safety. "The political situation prohibits overt American military intervention," Patterson explained while indicating the geographic constraints that would limit their operational flexibility. "This mission must appear to be a humanitarian evacuation conducted by private security contractors rather than active-duty military personnel. You'll be operating without official support, air cover, or reinforcement capability." The implications were staggering. Charlie Company would be inserting into a combat zone where they could expect to face professional military opposition, while maintaining the fiction that they were civilian contractors performing rescue operations. Their equipment would be limited to what could be justified for private security personnel. Their communication with higher headquarters would be severely restricted, and their escape routes would depend entirely on maintaining tactical surprise. Until the evacuation was complete, Lieutenant Colonel Hawkins felt the familiar weight of operational responsibility settling on her shoulders as she studied the mission parameters. Her special operations experience had involved similar, politically sensitive missions where American forces operated under unofficial cover to achieve strategic objectives that couldn't be accomplished through conventional military channels. "Sir, the enemy force composition suggests they've been preparing for exactly this type of American response," she noted while analyzing the defensive positions that controlled access to the target area. "Their positioning indicates detailed knowledge of our evacuation procedures and tactical preferences. This feels like a deliberate trap designed to compromise American personnel under circumstances that would create maximum political embarrassment." The observation carried implications that extended far beyond Charlie Company's immediate tactical challenges. If the enemy had detailed knowledge of American operational procedures, it suggested intelligence penetration that might compromise not just this mission but ongoing operations throughout the region. That Major Thompson dismissed her concerns with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered opposition that exceeded the capabilities of well-trained American forces. Ma'am, intelligence assessments always overestimate enemy capabilities to ensure we're prepared for worst-case scenarios. Professional militaries have standard tactical doctrine that's predictable once you understand their operational patterns. But Hawkins recognized the tactical signatures she'd observed during exercise. Iron thunder. The enemy positioning, communication patterns, and coordination capabilities matched the sophisticated opposition that had thoroughly analyzed Charlie Company's procedures during what everyone else had assumed was routine training, the deployment. Timeline compressed their preparation into a frantic, 12-hour period that tested the unit's ability to transition from peacetime garrison operations to combat readiness. Equipment had to be sanitized to remove identifying marks that might compromise the mission's unofficial status. Personnel records were transferred to classified storage systems that would deny official knowledge of their deployment. Communication. Procedures were established that would maintain operational security while allowing minimal coordination with higher headquarters. Staff. Sergeant Chun coordinated the equipment preparation with the mechanical precision that marked his 15 years of military service. But even his extensive experience hadn't prepared him for the unusual constraints of this deployment. The weapons they could carry were limited to commercially available firearms that wouldn't identify them as military personnel. Their communication equipment had to be civilian-grade systems that could operate on frequencies available to private security contractors. "This isn't how we normally operate," Chun confided to Sergeant Torres while they supervised the loading of transport aircraft that would carry Charlie Company to their insertion point. "We're going into a combat zone with equipment limitations. That put us at a significant disadvantage against professional military opposition." The insertion flight crossed international boundaries under cover of darkness, using flight paths that avoided radar coverage and maintained the fiction that they were civilian contractors rather than active-duty military personnel. The aircraft itself was operated by a private aviation company that specialized in supporting sensitive government operations without official acknowledgement. Captain Rodriguez sat in the aircraft's cargo bay watching her soldiers prepare equipment and review mission parameters during the 6-hour flight to their destination. The professional calm that marked experienced military personnel couldn't entirely mask the tension that accompanied deployments into uncertain tactical situations. "Ma'am, the intelligence briefing mentioned foreign military advisors with the opposing forces," Private First Class Martinez asked during a break in the pre-mission rehearsals. "Do we know what kind of training and equipment they're providing to the local forces?" The question highlighted one of the mission's most dangerous unknowns. Foreign military advisors could provide the enemy with tactical expertise, advanced weapon systems, and detailed knowledge of American operational procedures that would significantly complicate Charlie Company's mission. Lieutenant Colonel Hawkins understood that the foreign advisors represented the same sophisticated opposition she'd identified during the training exercise. The enemy's preparation, tactical positioning, and operational planning suggested they'd been specifically preparing for American intervention using intelligence gathered during official training programs. The foreign advisors have access to detailed information about our tactical procedures and operational capabilities, she told the assembled soldiers during the final mission briefing. "We should expect them to anticipate our standard approaches and have prepared countermeasures for conventional American tactics." Major Thompson maintained his confidence in the mission plan despite the intelligence warnings about enemy sophistication. "We've trained extensively for operations in complex environments against capable opposition. Our tactical competence and operational flexibility give us significant advantages over any enemy force we're likely to encounter." The insertion proceeded according to plan, with Charlie Company establishing initial positions in terrain that provided concealment while allowing observation of the target area. The safe house containing American personnel was located in an urban environment that offered multiple approach routes, but also provided numerous defensive positions for opposing forces. The first indication that Hawkins' warnings had been prophetic came during the initial reconnaissance phase. Enemy patrols demonstrated tactical discipline and coordination that exceeded anything in the intelligence estimates. Their movement patterns suggested professional military training, advanced communication capabilities, and detailed knowledge of American reconnaissance procedures. They're positioned exactly where they would need to be to counter our standard infiltration routes, Staff Sergeant Chun reported during the tactical assessment. It's like they knew we were coming and prepared, specifically for our operational approach. The enemy's preparation extended beyond defensive positioning to include active countermeasures that targeted Charlie Company's communication systems, surveillance equipment, and coordination procedures. Electronic warfare capabilities that shouldn't have been available to irregular forces were being used to disrupt American tactical networks while maintaining secure communication for enemy forces. Sergeant First Class Peterson, who was conducting overwatch for the reconnaissance team, reported sophisticated enemy surveillance that suggested professional intelligence capabilities. They've got eyes on all our positions, and they're coordinating their observation through encrypted networks that we can't intercept. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly as it became clear that Charlie Company was facing opposition that had been specifically prepared for their mission. The enemy possessed detailed knowledge of American tactical procedures, advanced equipment that countered NATO operational advantages, and coordination capabilities that suggested extensive preparation for exactly this scenario. Major Thompson's confidence began to waver as reports from his platoon leaders painted a picture of enemy capabilities that exceeded every assumption in their mission planning. This is significantly more sophisticated opposition than our intelligence estimates suggested. They appear to have detailed knowledge of our operational procedures and have prepared specific countermeasures for our tactical approaches. But the mission parameters prohibited abort procedures or requests for reinforcement that might compromise the political fiction surrounding their deployment. Charlie Company was committed to achieving their objectives regardless of the opposition they encountered, and withdrawal would mean abandoning American personnel to capture or death at the hands of enemy forces. The moment of absolute decision arrived at 13:47 hours when Major Thompson's voice crackled over the tactical radio network with the kind of panic that experienced soldiers never wanted to hear from their commanding officer. His transmission cut through the electronic warfare jamming that had been steadily degrading Charlie Company's communication capabilities for the past 6 hours. All stations, this is Bravo 6. I am declaring a tactical emergency. We have multiple wounded, including myself, and are pinned down by accurate sniper fire from unknown positions. Request immediate medical evacuation and close air support. Break. Our current tactical situation is untenable, and we are taking casualties faster than we can treat them. The coordinates Thompson transmitted placed his element in a kill zone that Hawkins had specifically warned against during their initial tactical planning. The urban intersection he'd chosen for his assault route was dominated by high ground that provided enemy marksmen with overlapping fields of fire and multiple escape routes. More critically, his position offered no covered approach for reinforcement or medical evacuation. Staff Sergeant Chun, who was monitoring all company frequencies from his position with the reserve element, immediately attempted to coordinate support for Thompson's trapped unit. But the enemy's electronic warfare capabilities had successfully jammed most military communication networks, leaving the company with only short-range tactical radios that couldn't reach the air support assets operating beyond the immediate battle area. "Ma'am, Major Thompson's element is completely cut off," Chun reported to Hawkins as she studied the tactical display that showed friendly and enemy positions throughout the operational area. "The enemy has them fixed in a position where they can't maneuver, can't be reinforced, and can't be evacuated without significant casualties to any relief force. The tactical situation had evolved exactly as Hawkins had predicted during their mission planning, but her warnings about enemy capabilities and defensive positioning had been dismissed as excessive caution from an officer whose primary experience involved administrative rather than combat operations. Now those same defensive positions were systematically destroying Charlie Company's combat effectiveness while maintaining the operational security that prevented outside intervention. Captain Rodriguez, who commanded the company's second assault element, was facing similar difficulties as her platoon encountered prepared defensive positions that channeled their movement into predetermined kill zones. Her radio transmissions carried the controlled tension of a professional soldier confronting tactical challenges that exceeded her unit's preparation and equipment capabilities. Bravo 6, this is Charlie 2. We are also encountering prepared positions with interlocking fields of fire. Enemy forces are using advanced night vision equipment and coordinated communication networks that suggest professional military training. Our standard tactical approaches are being anticipated and countered by opposing forces with detailed knowledge of our operational procedures. The enemy's tactical competence was systematically neutralizing every advantage that American forces normally enjoyed in combat operations. Their positioning eliminated the mobility and firepower superiority that allowed smaller American units to defeat larger enemy forces. Their communication security prevented the intelligence gathering that enabled precise targeting of enemy leadership and coordination centers. Most critically, their knowledge of American tactical doctrine allowed them to predict and counter every standard response that Charlie Company might attempt. Lieutenant Colonel Hawkins found herself in the impossible position of watching American soldiers die because the command structure had refused to acknowledge warnings that could have prevented the tactical disaster now unfolding. Her special operations experience had taught her to recognize the signatures of sophisticated military opposition, but her insights had been dismissed as the overcautious observations of someone whose gender disqualified her from understanding real combat operations. The radio traffic from both trapped elements painted a grim picture of mounting casualties and dwindling ammunition supplies. Enemy forces were maintaining sustained pressure while avoiding the decisive engagements that might allow American firepower advantages to influence the tactical outcome. Their coordination suggested command and control capabilities that exceeded anything available to irregular forces or local military units. All stations, this is Bravo 6. Thompson's increasingly desperate voice transmitted through static and electronic interference. We have sustained 6 casualties, including 3 here. Our ammunition is running low, and we cannot maintain our current defensive positions much longer. I am requesting permission to attempt a breakout to an alternate extraction site. But Hawkins knew that any attempt at movement would expose Thompson's already depleted force to the coordinated fire of enemy positions that had been specifically prepared for exactly that tactical decision. The enemy's positioning and coordination indicated they were following a predetermined plan, designed to force American units into tactical choices that would maximize casualties while preventing successful extraction. The mission parameters that prohibited official military support were now directly contributing to American deaths as Charlie Company found itself facing professional military opposition without access to the air support, artillery, and reinforcement capabilities that normally provided decisive advantages in combat operations. The political fiction that required them to operate as civilian contractors had stripped away the military capabilities necessary for survival against peer-level opposition. Sergeant First Class Peterson, who was providing overwatch for the trapped elements from his concealed position on elevated terrain, transmitted tactical intelligence that confirmed Hawkins' worst fears about the enemy's preparation and capabilities. All stations, this is Eagle Eye. Enemy forces are equipped with thermal imaging, encrypted communications, and coordinated command and control that indicate state-level military support. They have anticipated every aspect of our tactical approach and have prepared specific countermeasures for our operational procedures. This is not a local militia or a regular force. We are facing professional military opposition with advanced equipment and detailed intelligence about our capabilities. The confirmation that Charlie Company was fighting a prepared enemy with access to classified intelligence about American tactical procedures transformed the mission from a rescue operation into a fight for survival against adversaries who possessed every advantage except the individual competence of American soldiers. But individual competence wasn't sufficient when facing professional military opposition that had been specifically prepared for this engagement. Private First Class Martinez, who served as radio operator for one of the trapped elements, transmitted a desperate plea that cut through the tactical coordination traffic with the raw emotion of someone watching his fellow soldiers die. Any station, this is Romeo 27. We need immediate assistance. Sergeant Williams is dead, Corporal Johnson is bleeding out, and we're down to our last magazines. The enemy knows exactly where we are, and they're coordinating. Fire from multiple positions. Someone needs to do something, or we're all going to die here. The transmission crystallized the impossible choice that confronted Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Hawkins as she stood in the Tactical Operations Center, watching the systematic destruction of the unit she was supposed to support. Every instinct developed through years of special operations told her exactly what needed to be done to save the trapped soldiers. But implementing that solution would require her to violate every regulation governing female participation in combat operations. The tactical situation demanded someone who could coordinate a complex multi-element rescue operation while simultaneously engaging enemy forces that possessed superior positioning and advanced military capabilities. The soldiers trapped in the kill zones needed tactical leadership that could adapt to rapidly changing battlefield conditions while maintaining the operational security necessary to prevent further casualties. Major Thompson, who was supposed to provide that leadership, was wounded and pinned down by enemy fire in a position that prevented him from coordinating broader tactical movements. Captain Rodriguez was facing similar constraints as her element, struggled to maintain defensive positions against coordinated enemy assault. The company's senior NCOs were distributed among the various elements, preventing them from exercising the centralized command necessary for complex tactical coordination. Staff. Sergeant Chun looked at Hawkins with the desperate hope of someone who understood that conventional solutions were no longer adequate for the crisis they faced. His 15 years of military experience had taught him to recognize when situations exceeded the capabilities of standard military procedures and required the kind of innovative thinking that could only come from someone with extensive combat experience. "Ma'am, you've got more tactical experience than anyone else in this company," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone making a statement that challenged fundamental assumptions about military hierarchy and gender roles. Those soldiers are going to die unless someone who knows how to handle this kind of situation takes charge of the rescue operation. The choice was stark and unforgiving. Hawkins could follow regulations that prohibited her from assuming tactical command of combat operations, maintaining the fiction that she was an administrative officer whose role was limited to support functions while American soldiers died in kill zones that she could have warned them to avoid. Or she could use her special operations experience to coordinate the kind of unconventional rescue operation that might save lives while destroying her military career and challenging every assumption about female capabilities in combat leadership. Radio traffic from the trapped elements was becoming increasingly desperate as ammunition supplies dwindled and casualties mounted. Enemy forces were maintaining coordinated pressure designed to prevent extraction while avoiding the kind of decisive engagement that might allow superior American training and equipment to influence the tactical outcome. Bravo 6, this is Charlie 2. Rodriguez transmitted with the controlled desperation of someone watching her soldiers die. "We cannot maintain our current positions much longer. Enemy forces are coordinating assault preparations from multiple directions. We need immediate tactical support, or we will be overrun within the next 30 minutes. The 30-minute timeline represented the absolute limit of Charlie Company's ability to maintain defensive positions against professional military opposition. After that point, wounded soldiers would become prisoners. Dead soldiers would become casualties that could trigger international incidents, and the political fiction surrounding their deployment would collapse in ways that might compromise American strategic interests throughout the region." Lieutenant Colonel Hawkins stared at the tactical display showing the positions of trapped American soldiers surrounded by enemy forces that possessed every advantage except the individual competence and courage of the men and women she was supposed to support. Her special operations experience provided her with the tactical knowledge necessary to coordinate their extraction, but using that knowledge would require her to assume command responsibilities that regulations explicitly prohibited. The moment of choice had arrived with the absolute clarity that marked life and death decisions in combat zones. She could preserve her career and maintain institutional comfort by following regulations that would result in American deaths, or she could save lives by challenging assumptions that had never been tested under the extreme conditions where military leadership mattered most. The weight of that decision pressed down on her shoulders as radio transmissions carried the increasingly desperate voices of soldiers who were running out of time, ammunition, and hope while she stood in a position to save them. If she possessed the courage to act on knowledge that regulations said she shouldn't have and couldn't use, the institutional barriers that had kept her tactical expertise hidden were about to collide with the reality that sometimes breaking rules was the only way to preserve the values those rules were supposed to protect. Sometimes being a good soldier meant being willing to stop being a soldier in the conventional sense and become something the military establishment had never been willing to acknowledge that women could be. The transformation began with a single word transmitted across the tactical radio network in a voice that carried 15 years of hidden combat experience, suddenly unleashed. "Reaper." The call sign that Rebecca Hawkins hadn't used since her special operations days in Afghanistan cut through the electronic warfare jamming and desperate radio chatter like a blade separating chaos from order. Every soldier in Charlie Company who heard that transmission knew instantly that something fundamental had changed in their tactical situation. "All stations, this is Reaper. I am assuming tactical command of all company elements, effective immediately. Acknowledged by CalSign in. Current status. We are implementing emergency extraction procedures under my direct control. Break. Bravo 6. Maintain your current defensive posture. Relief is inbound to your position within 15 minutes. The authority in her voice transcended rank, gender, and institutional hierarchy, connecting directly with the survival instincts of soldiers who recognized the sound of someone who knew exactly how to keep them alive under impossible circumstances. This wasn't Lieutenant Colonel Hawkins, the administrative officer, speaking. This was Reaper, the combat leader whose tactical genius had saved American lives in the mountains of Afghanistan when conventional military doctrine had failed. Staff Sergeant Chen felt the change immediately as Hawkins began issuing orders with the precise confidence of someone who had coordinated similar operations under enemy fire. Her transformation from support officer to combat commander was so complete and natural that it seemed incredible she had ever been anything else. "Chen, establish overwatch positions on buildings Charlie and Delta with your best marksmen. Coordinate suppressive fire on enemy positions. Golf through November when I give the signal. Peterson, you're my tactical coordinator. I need real-time updates on enemy movement patterns and ammunition status for all trapped elements." The orders flowed with mathematical precision, each instruction building on the previous one, to create a comprehensive tactical plan that addressed every aspect of their desperate situation. Hawkins' special operations experience had taught her to think in terms of complex, multi-element coordination while maintaining the flexibility to adapt when circumstances changed. Captain Rodriguez, whose element was pinned down in a separate kill zone 300 meters from Thompson's position, felt a surge of hope when she heard Reaper's tactical assessment of her situation. The voice on the radio belonged to someone who understood exactly what she was facing and had a plan to get her soldiers home alive. Charlie 2, you're going to execute a tactical withdrawal to Rally Point Bravo in sequence with the diversion I'm creating for Bravo 6. When you hear the explosions from the north, move your element southeast using Building 7 as cover. I'll have suppressive fire coordinated to keep enemy heads down during your movement. But the most dramatic change came in Hawkins' coordination of assets that other officers hadn't even known were available. Her special operations background had taught her to think beyond conventional military resources, utilizing every capability that might contribute to mission success, regardless of whether it appeared in standard tactical manuals. Eagle Eye, I need you to designate enemy positions using your laser marker. Coordinate with the AC-130 that's been orbiting outside communication range for the past 2 hours. Authentication code is November 77 Alpha. Tell them Reaper needs immediate fire support on designated targets. The revelation that air support had been available but unreachable through normal communication channels highlighted the difference between conventional military coordination and the special operations mentality that never accepted limitations as final. Hawkins had maintained communication with assets that operated outside standard command structures, preparing for exactly the kind of crisis that was now unfolding. Sergeant First Class Peterson, who had been providing Overwatch intelligence, transmitted coordinates with renewed confidence as he realized that someone was finally listening to his tactical observations and incorporating them into a comprehensive plan for getting everyone home safely. Reaper, this is Eagle Eye. Enemy command post is located in Building Tango, 3rd floor, northeast corner. They're coordinating all defensive fires from that position. Secondary targets include the sniper positions in Buildings Uniform and Victor that have been engaging our trapped elements. The air support arrived with the devastating precision that marked special operations coordination at its finest. The FE AC-130 gunship had been monitoring the tactical situation for hours, waiting for proper authentication codes that would allow them to engage enemy targets without compromising the mission's unofficial status. Hawkins' special operations credentials provided exactly that authorization. The first rounds from the aircraft's 40mm cannon eliminated the enemy command post in a spectacular explosion that shattered windows throughout the urban area while simultaneously destroying the coordination center that had been directing the systematic destruction of Charlie Company. Secondary explosions indicated that the building had contained significant ammunition supplies that amplified the tactical impact of the precision strike. All stations, this is Reaper. Air support is engaging priority targets. Execute movement to designated rally points on my command. Chun, initiate suppressive fire on enemy positions. Rodriguez, begin your withdrawal now. Thompson, prepare for extraction when the suppressive fire lifts enemy observation from your position. The coordination was flawless with each element, moving according to precise timing that maximized their mutual support while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. Hawkins had transformed a desperate survival situation into a carefully orchestrated tactical operation that utilized every available resource to achieve objectives that conventional military thinking had deemed impossible. Private First Class Martinez, who had been certain he was going to die in the kill zone where Thompson's element was trapped, felt overwhelming relief as suppressive fire from multiple directions forced enemy snipers to abandon their positions while American soldiers moved to safety under the cover of coordinated supporting fires. "Holy shit, somebody actually knows what they're doing," he whispered to his battle buddy as they bounded toward the rally point where medical personnel were, already established to treat wounded soldiers. The tactical competence of their rescue operation exceeded anything he'd experienced during his 3 years of military service. But Hawkins' most impressive achievement was her coordination of the medical evacuation that saved lives while maintaining the operational security necessary to prevent political complications from their unofficial deployment. Her special operations experience had taught her to plan for medical emergencies that occurred in areas where conventional evacuation procedures weren't available. Dust off 2-7, this is Reaper. Landing zone is secured and marked. We have 6 priority casualties requiring immediate evacuation to friendly medical facilities. Authentication code is Romeo 44 Charlie. You are cleared for immediate extraction upon reaching my position. The medical helicopter that responded to her call had been pre-positioned by special operations planners who understood that politically sensitive missions required medical support that operated outside normal command channels. The aircrew recognized Hawkins' authentication codes and responded with the efficiency that marked elite aviation units accustomed to supporting sensitive operations. Sergeant Williams, who had been critically wounded during the initial enemy contact, received life-saving medical treatment during the helicopter flight to a NATO medical facility that was equipped to handle combat casualties without creating official records that might compromise the mission's covert status. His survival depended entirely on the tactical coordination that had made his evacuation possible under circumstances where conventional military procedures would have failed. The extraction of American personnel from the safe house proceeded with similar precision, as Hawkins coordinated a multi-element operation that neutralized remaining enemy resistance while maintaining the cover story that private security contractors rather than active duty military personnel were conducting the rescue. Her ability to think beyond conventional tactical limitations enabled success where standard military approaches would have resulted in political disaster. Precious cargo is secured and moving to extract LZ, she transmitted as the rescued American diplomatic personnel and contractors were loaded aboard aircraft that would carry them to safety. All friendly elements are accounted for with no additional casualties sustained during rescue operations. The enemy forces that had been specifically prepared to counter American military operations found themselves outmaneuvered by tactical approaches that exceeded their intelligence preparation and planning assumptions. Hawkins' special operations background had taught her to operate beyond the predictable patterns that conventional military units followed, utilizing innovative approaches that confused enemy expectations while achieving mission objectives through unconventional means. The final phase of the operation involved extracting Charlie Company itself from the combat zone without leaving evidence that American military forces had been involved in the action. Hawkins coordinated a complex movement that utilized multiple extraction sites, civilian transportation assets, and communication procedures that maintained plausible deniability while ensuring that every soldier reached safety. All stations. This is Reaper. Mission accomplished. All personnel and precious cargo are secure. We are implementing the extraction protocol Delta. Acknowledge receipt and comply with sanitization procedures as briefed. Outstanding work by everyone involved in this operation. The soldiers who had been rescued from certain death or capture stared at Lieutenant Colonel Hawkins with expressions that reflected their complete transformation in understanding what leadership meant and where it could be found. The woman they had dismissed as an administrative officer had just demonstrated tactical competence that exceeded anything they had witnessed from conventional military commanders. Staff. Sergeant Chun approached Hawkins as the extraction aircraft lifted off from their final landing zone. his face reflecting the awe of someone who had just witnessed military leadership at its absolute finest. "Ma'am, I've served with some outstanding officers during my 15 years in the Army, but what you just accomplished was the most professional tactical operation I've ever been part of. Those soldiers are alive because you had the courage to do what needed to be done regardless of regulations or career consequences." But Hawkins knew that her actions had shattered every assumption about female participation in combat operations while simultaneously proving that leadership effectiveness had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with competence, experience, and the willingness to accept responsibility for the lives of subordinates. She had crossed lines that the military establishment preferred to keep clearly defined, challenging institutional bias through demonstration rather than argument. The after-action reports would struggle to explain how her routine evacuation operation, conducted by private security contractors, had achieved tactical success against professional military opposition that had been specifically prepared to counter American intervention. The classified files that documented the real events would reveal tactical leadership that revolutionized military thinking about combat effectiveness and command authority. Every soldier who participated in the operation understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary that transcended conventional understanding of military capabilities and leadership potential. The quiet administrative officer who served coffee and managed paperwork had revealed herself to be one of the most tactically competent combat leaders any of them had ever encountered, saving their lives through expertise that institutional BIAS had kept hidden until crisis made concealment impossible. The Pentagon briefing room that had once echoed with confident assertions about gender limitations in combat roles now hosted the most extraordinary military evaluation in modern American history. 3 months after Operation Silent Thunder, as the classified mission had been designated, senior military leadership from every service branch gathered to examine evidence that challenged fundamental assumptions about leadership, capability, and the relationship between institutional bias and operational effectiveness. General Patricia Morrison, the Army's first female 4-star general, stood before tactical displays that showed the precise coordination and innovative thinking that had transformed certain disaster into remarkable success. Her presentation to the Joint Chiefs of Staff would reshape military policy in ways that extended far beyond Charlie Company's individual experience. Gentlemen, what you're about to see represents a complete paradigm shift in our understanding of combat leadership effectiveness. General Morrison began, her voice carrying the authority of someone whose own career had been built on challenging institutional limitations. The tactical operation conducted by Lieutenant Colonel Hawkins demonstrates capabilities that exceed those of most special operations commanders, achieved under constraints that would have defeated conventional military approaches. The detailed analysis of Hawkins' tactical coordination revealed decision-making processes and innovative resource utilization that military academies would study for decades. Her ability to synthesize complex intelligence, coordinate multiple elements under extreme pressure, and achieve strategic objectives through unconventional approaches represented the kind of military leadership that American forces needed to maintain superiority against increasingly sophisticated adversaries. Colonel James Patterson, who had once limited Hawkins to administrative roles based on gender assumptions, found himself testifying before the evaluation board about capabilities he had systematically ignored throughout her service with his command. His testimony carried the uncomfortable honesty of someone confronting the professional consequences of institutional bias. The legacy of Operation Silent Thunder extended beyond individual careers or policy changes to represent a fundamental shift in understanding what leadership meant and where it could be found. In boardrooms and classrooms, emergency rooms, and research laboratories, the example of Rebecca Hawkins reminded people that competence and courage existed everywhere. often in places where institutional bias prevented their recognition and utilization. Sometimes the person with the solution was the one nobody was listening to. Sometimes the quiet voice in the background held the key to everyone's survival. And sometimes being underestimated was exactly the preparation needed for the moment when institutional assumptions collided with reality and only genuine competence could bridge the gap between failure and success. The transformation was complete, but the universal message endured. True leadership doesn't come from titles or traditional expectations, but from the willingness to act when action is needed, regardless of who you are or where institutional bias says you belong. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.